Emily never expected the night to unfold the way it did. The dinner party at Mark's colleague's house had been long, filled with conversations she didn't quite belong in. Mark, her husband, thrived in those settings, talking about contracts, numbers, and business deals that seemed endless. Emily played her part, smiling politely, answering when spoken to, but her heart wasn't in it. By the time dessert was served, she was exhausted. All she wanted was to go home, slip off her heels, and breathe. But then Mark leaned toward her, his voice low but hurried. "Emily, would you mind if Daniel drives you home? I need to stay back for a late discussion." He didn't wait for her answer, just gave a quick nod toward his friend. Daniel, Mark's closest friend since college, was already standing near the coat rack, car keys in hand. Emily hesitated for a second. It wasn't unusual. Daniel often helped when Mark couldn't. Still, something about leaving with him tonight felt different, though she couldn't say why. She agreed because what else could she do? She kissed Mark's cheek, wished him luck with his meeting, and followed Daniel out into the damp night. The air smelled of rain, heavy clouds promising more. Daniel opened the car door for her, a small gesture, but one that carried a quiet gentleness. Emily slipped inside, the leather seat cool beneath her, and watched as he circled to the driver's side. The moment the engine started, silence filled the car. Not awkward silence, just stillness. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts. Emily folded her hands in her lap, watching the streetlights flicker against the wet pavement. She expected Daniel to make small talk, maybe ask about the party, but he didn't. Instead, he drove with calm focus, his jaw set, his hands steady on the wheel. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke. Emily's mind wandered. She thought of Mark, already lost in conversations, probably not even noticing she was gone. She thought of the night at an empty house, quiet rooms, and the familiar ache of being second to his work. She shook the thought away, not wanting to sound bitter, even in her own head. It was Daniel who broke the silence. His voice was low, almost thoughtful. "Long night, huh?" He glanced at her quickly, then back to the road. Emily gave a small laugh. "You could say that. I think I smiled so much my face hurts." Her tone was light, but she meant it. Daniel chuckled softly, the sound warm and easy. "I know what you mean. Those gatherings aren't really my thing either. Too much talk, not enough meaning." Emily turned her head to look at him, surprised by his honesty. Most people around Mark pretended to enjoy those events, always trying to impress. But Daniel wasn't like that. He always stood a little apart, friendly, but never desperate for attention. Tonight, that difference stood out more than ever. The streets were nearly empty, the rain beginning to fall in soft, steady drops. The sound of it filled the car, a rhythmic background to their quiet conversation. Emily felt herself relaxing, the tension from the party slipping away. She leaned slightly toward the window, watching the reflections of passing lights blur across the glass. Then, Daniel said something that caught her completely off guard. "Emily, do you ever feel like people don't really see you? Like they know you're there, but they don't actually notice?" His question hung in the air, unexpected and strangely personal. Emily blinked, unsure how to answer. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and finally whispered, "Yes, more often than I'd like to admit." Her own words startled her. She hadn't planned to say them, hadn't meant to let that piece of truth slip out. But Daniel nodded as if he understood completely, as if he'd been waiting for her to say it. The car rolled forward, the world outside painted in streaks of rain. Emily sat still, her heart beating faster than before. She didn't know why his words mattered so much, but they did. She felt seen in a way she hadn't in years, and that realization, simple as it was, unsettled her more than the storm outside. When Daniel glanced at her again, his eyes lingered for a fraction longer than they should have. Not enough to be inappropriate, but just enough to make her breath catch. Emily turned back toward the window quickly, pretending to watch the rain, but inside her, something shifted. It was just a car ride, she told herself. Just a favor from her husband's friend. But as the night stretched ahead, she sensed this was the beginning of something she wasn't ready for. Something she couldn't yet name. And as the car continued down the empty road, Emily had no idea that this quiet drive home would change everything she thought she knew about her life. The car moved steadily through the dark streets, the rain falling harder now, blurring the world outside into streaks of silver and black. Emily sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her mind restless. She wanted to speak, but couldn't find the right words. It felt strange, sitting so close to Daniel in the silence. Not uncomfortable, just different. Like something she hadn't expected but couldn't ignore. Daniel drove with calm focus, his eyes on the road, the faint reflection of streetlights catching in his gaze. He didn't rush, didn't fidget, didn't fill the silence with meaningless chatter. That in itself felt unusual to Emily. Most people tried to cover quiet moments with words, but Daniel seemed comfortable letting this stillness sit between them. The rain tapped against the windshield in a steady rhythm, the sound soothing, yet somehow heavy. Emily watched the wipers sweep back and forth, clearing the glass, only for droplets to fall again instantly. It felt like a picture of her own thoughts cleared for a moment, then clouded again. She thought about the night, how Mark had asked Daniel to drive her without even asking if she minded. She thought about how easily she had agreed, as if her choices weren't her own anymore. And now here she was in the quiet of Daniel's car, feeling more awake than she had all evening. Long roads feel different in the rain, Daniel finally said, his voice low and steady. Emily turned her head slightly, surprised by the comment. It wasn't really about the weather. She could tell by the tone. They make you think, he added. She gave a small nod, her eyes drifting back to the wet pavement ahead. Yes, they do. Her voice was soft, almost lost under the hum of the engine. For a moment, that was all. Then Daniel spoke again. You know, Emily, sometimes I wonder if people realize how much they matter. His words were unexpected, carrying a weight she didn't anticipate. She glanced at him, searching his expression, but his eyes stayed fixed on the road. He didn't say it dramatically, didn't even look at her. Yet the words landed deeply. Emily hesitated before answering. I don't think most people realize it. Or maybe they forget. She wasn't sure why she said that. But it came out true. Daniel nodded slowly, as though her answer meant something to him. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full, charged, like a space holding unspoken thoughts. Emily's chest tightened. She didn't know what he was really trying to say, or if she was only imagining it, but the moment felt important. To distract herself, she glanced out the window. Houses passed by, their windows glowing warmly, families gathered inside, safe from the storm. She wondered what it would feel like to be in one of those homes, surrounded by laughter instead of work calls, by conversation instead of silence. She pushed the thought away quickly, but it lingered anyway. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat. I've always admired people who can be themselves, no matter what others expect, he said after a pause. It's rare. Emily tilted her head. You think so? Absolutely, he said firmly. Most people just blend in, go along, stop chasing what they love because life gets in the way. But when someone keeps that spark, it's unforgettable. His tone was calm, but the conviction in his voice made her pulse quicken. Emily lowered her eyes, her fingers tracing the seam of her purse. She thought of the canvas in the attic, the brushes she hadn't touched in years. She thought of how she once spent hours painting, losing herself in color and light until life pulled her in another direction. She swallowed hard, unsure why this conversation with Daniel was stirring pieces of herself she had buried long ago. The rain grew heavier, drumming harder on the roof, forcing Daniel to slow down. The world outside blurred even more, the headlights of passing cars stretching into long streaks of light. The atmosphere inside the car grew even quieter, more intimate, as if the storm had sealed them off from everything else. Emily finally spoke, her voice low but steady. I used to paint. Before I got married, I thought I'd spend my life doing it. But now? She trailed off, shaking her head. Now it just feels like a memory. Daniel glanced at her then, his eyes sharp but gentle. Why did you stop? She gave a short, bitter laugh. Because life happens. Because people expect certain things. because it didn't seem practical. Her words came out quicker than she meant, tinged with frustration she hadn't realized she was holding. Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. Emily, the things that make you who you are should never be treated as impractical. They're not extra, they're essential. His words were firm, almost protective. Emily blinked, caught off guard. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not Mark, not her friends, not anyone. She didn't know how to respond. She simply turned her gaze back to the rain, her throat tight, her chest rising and falling faster than before. The quiet returned, but it wasn't the same as before. This silence felt alive, like an unspoken truth hanging between them. Emily's heart pounded, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't dare put into words. She wondered if Daniel realized what he was doing, what he was awakening in her. Or maybe he did, and that was the very reason he spoke the way he did. She didn't know. And the uncertainty left her both unsettled and strangely drawn in. The car turned onto a long stretch of road. The lights fewer now, the darkness deeper. Emily could hear her own breathing, could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. She told herself this was just a conversation, just kindness from a friend. But deep down she knew it was more than that. Something unspoken had begun to grow in the quiet, something she wasn't ready to face but couldn't ignore. And as the rain poured harder, Emily realized that the silence between them was no longer empty. It was the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. But it already had the power to change everything. The rain kept falling, steady and strong, as Daniel's car moved through the quiet streets. Emily sat with her hands resting on her purse. Her mind caught between the sound of the storm and the weight of Daniel's last words. She hadn't expected him to speak with such intensity, to remind her of the person she used to be. For years, she had pushed that part of herself away, convinced it no longer mattered. But now, sitting beside him, it was all she could think about. Daniel broke the silence again, his voice thoughtful. "Tell me, Emily, what did you love about painting?" The question surprised her, not because of what he asked, but because of the way he asked it. He wasn't just being polite. He genuinely wanted to know. She hesitated, unsure if she should answer. Yet something in his tone encouraged honesty. She turned her head slightly, her eyes soft. "I loved the freedom. The way a blank canvas could become anything. I could lose myself in it. Hours would pass and it felt like only minutes. It made me feel alive." Daniel nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting that. "And you gave that up?" Her chest tightened. "I didn't mean to. Life just shifted. Responsibilities came first. It felt selfish to spend time on something that wasn't necessary." His grip on the wheel tightened, his jaw set. "But it was necessary. For you. For your soul. Why does everyone act like joy is optional?" Emily's breath caught. She wasn't used to someone defending her so fiercely. Mark never asked about her art. He never pushed her to talk about it, never seemed to notice she had abandoned it. But Daniel did, and that difference cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She looked down at her lap, her fingers fidgeting with the zipper of her purse. "I don't even know if I'd be good at it anymore. It's been years." Daniel's voice softened, but the conviction remained. "Emily, talent doesn't disappear. Passion doesn't vanish. It waits. You've just buried it, but it's still there." Her throat tightened. She wanted to brush his words aside, laugh them off. But she couldn't. They struck something deep inside her, something fragile, yet alive. She turned toward him, her eyes shining faintly in the dim light of the dashboard. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't look at her right away. His eyes stayed on the road, steady and calm. When he finally answered, his voice carried a quiet truth. "Because I see you, Emily, and I don't think you see yourself anymore." The words landed with a force she hadn't expected. She froze, her breath catching, her heart pounding. No one had ever said that to her. Not even Mark. She felt both exposed and comforted at the same time. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The car filled with the sound of rain and the soft hum of the engine. Emily stared out the window, but the blur of the streetlights didn't hold her attention. It was Daniel's words echoing inside her, making her question everything she thought she knew. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." Daniel turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see the sincerity in his eyes. "Then maybe it's time to remember." Her chest ached. She wanted to cry, but she held it back. Instead, she leaned her head against the window, the cool glass grounding her. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who painted late into the night, who dreamed without fear, who believed love was supposed to feel alive. That girl felt like a stranger now, but Daniel's words made her wonder if she could find her again. The drive continued, their conversation dipping in and out of silence. Daniel asked about her favorite subjects to paint, and Emily found herself talking more than she had planned. She told him about landscapes, about how colors shifted with the light, about how a single brushstroke could change everything. As she spoke, her hands moved in small gestures, her voice gaining life she hadn't felt in years. Daniel listened without interruption, his eyes flicking between the road and her face. Every so often, he would smile, not in amusement, but in quiet admiration. "That's the Emily I remember," he said softly when she paused. "The one who lights up when she talks about what she loves." Her cheeks warmed. She hadn't realized how much she had revealed. "I guess I got carried away." "Don't apologize for that," he replied firmly. "It suits you." His words lingered in the air, heavier than they should have been. Emily looked away quickly, her heart racing. She reminded herself this was Mark's best friend. This was dangerous. But no matter how much she tried to silence it, the truth pulsed inside her. She felt alive in his presence, more alive than she had in years. The rain eased slightly, the storm softening as the car turned onto quieter streets. Emily glanced at Daniel again, catching the way his profile looked in the dim light. Strong, calm, steady. She forced herself to look away, but the image stayed with her. Inside, her emotions twisted, gratitude, confusion, longing, guilt. She didn't know what to do with them. She didn't know what to say. So she stayed quiet, letting the weight of their conversation hang between them. Daniel didn't press her further. He seemed to understand that she needed space, that his words had already stirred enough inside her. But his silence wasn't distance. It was presence. It was knowing she was there, and that was enough. As they neared her neighborhood, Emily's pulse quickened. Soon the drive would end. Soon she would step back into her quiet house, back into the life she knew. But something had changed in these few miles. A conversation, just words. Just moments had shaken the ground beneath her feet. She wasn't sure what stunned her more, the things Daniel said, or the way they made her feel. And as the car slowed, she realized this wasn't just a ride home anymore. It was the beginning of something far more complicated. The storm outside grew louder as Daniel's car rolled deeper into the night. Rain hammered against the roof, blurring the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. The streets shimmered with reflections, empty and endless. Inside the car, the air was heavy, charged with something Emily couldn't name but could feel in her chest with every breath. She sat with her arms folded loosely, eyes fixed on the glass. Her thoughts were restless. She kept hearing Daniel's words from before, words about passion, about being seen, about remembering who she was. They weren't casual remarks. They had been sharp, precise, aimed at the places in her heart she didn't let anyone touch. And now, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't push them away. The storm outside almost felt like a mirror to what was happening inside her. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, and each flash of lightning lit the sky in quick bursts. Emily felt the same flashes within herself, moments of clarity, then sudden shadows of doubt. She wasn't used to feeling this alive. She wasn't used to feeling this close. Daniel's hands rested firm on the steering wheel, his posture steady, his focus controlled. But even without looking directly at him, she could sense the tension. His silence wasn't empty. It was thick, as though he was holding back words he wanted to say. That awareness made her heart race. When the rain grew too heavy, he slowed the car, leaning forward slightly as if the storm demanded more of his attention. His profile, lit by the faint glow of the dashboard, looked calm but serious. Emily found herself staring for a moment too long before quickly turning her eyes away. Her thoughts argued against her feelings. This is Mark's friend. This is just a ride. Stop making it more than it is. But her body betrayed her. The warmth in her chest, the quickness of her pulse. The way she noticed every small detail, those were not things she could control. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. His voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. Funny how storms make everything clearer, isn't it? Emily turned to him, confused. Clearer. It feels like it makes everything harder to see. He gave a faint smile. Outside, maybe? But inside? Storms strip things down. They make you feel what you try to hide. She blinked, his words catching her off guard again. He had a way of speaking that went straight past her defenses, landing in places she didn't expect. She didn't know how to answer, so she stayed silent. But the truth of it echoed in her. The car moved slower now, tires slicing through puddles. Every sound, the rain, the engine, the wipers felt magnified. Emily sat still, but her mind was racing. She thought about her marriage, about the quiet distance that had grown between her and Mark. She thought about how unnoticed she often felt, how invisible parts of her had become. And then she thought about Daniel, sitting beside her, reminding her of pieces she thought she had lost forever. Her chest rose and fell more quickly. She felt restless, alive, but also guilty. She shouldn't be feeling this. She knew it. Yet she couldn't deny the pull. Daniel glanced at her briefly, his eyes searching. "You're quiet again?" he said softly. Emily forced a small smile. "Just thinking." "About what?" he asked gently. She hesitated. Should she tell the truth? Or should she cover it with something safe? Finally, she said, "About how strange it feels. Being reminded of things I thought I had let go. Things I buried a long time ago." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tightening. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Maybe you buried them because you thought no one would notice if they were gone." Her breath caught. That was exactly it. And the fact that he understood without her saying it scared her and comforted her all at once. She turned toward the window again, blinking back the sudden sting in her eyes. The storm pounded harder. The car crawled down the empty street, wrapped in shadows and rain. Emily pressed her hand lightly against the glass, the coolness grounding her, reminding her she was still here, still in control. But deep inside, something was shifting. She told herself this was nothing more than conversation, that Daniel was simply kind, thoughtful, a good listener. But her heart whispered something else, that these moments meant more. That the way he looked at her and the way he spoke to her were not ordinary. Daniel's voice broke through again, low but certain. "You deserve to feel alive again, Emily." Her eyes widened. The words hung between them like lightning, sharp and bright, impossible to ignore. She turned toward him, her lips parting as if to respond, but nothing came out. The sincerity in his voice left her stunned. Her pulse raced. She felt exposed, vulnerable, caught in a truth she wasn't ready to face. She wanted to deny it, to push back, but she couldn't, because deep down, she knew he was right. The storm raged outside, water streaming down the windshield, thunder rolling closer. Inside the car, another storm brewed, one of unspoken feelings, dangerous and undeniable. Emily sat frozen, torn between what she knew was right and what her heart was trying to tell her. And as the car turned the final corner toward her street, she realized she would never forget this night. Not because of the rain, not because of the storm, but because of the words Daniel had just spoken. Words that reached into the deepest part of her and refused to let go. The traffic light ahead turned red, forcing Daniel to slow the car and stop. The storm had softened to a drizzle, but the streets still glistened under the glow of the lamps. Inside the car, the silence was louder than the rain. Emily shifted slightly in her seat, her heart pounding. She could feel the closeness of the space. It's the way the air seemed to tighten around them. Daniel's hands rested on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the dark leather. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he turned, just enough to look at her. His eyes were calm, steady, but there was something behind them, something searching. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice carrying weight, "you deserve to feel alive again." The words struck her like a spark in the darkness. She froze, her breath catching. The hum of the engine filled the space. But her mind was louder, alive. The word echoed inside her, pressing against the walls she had built around herself for years. Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to ask what he meant, why he said it. But she couldn't. The honesty in his tone, the certainty in his eyes, left her stunned. Instead, she turned toward the window, pretending to watch the rain slide down the glass. But her reflection gave her wide cheeks flushed a storm within. The light turned green, and Daniel pressed his foot gently on the gas. The car rolled forward, but the weight of his words stayed heavy in the air. Emily's chest tightened, her mind racing. She wasn't used to being seen this way. She wasn't used to someone naming the emptiness she carried. Someone daring to suggest she deserved more than the quiet life she had settled into. She clutched her purse tighter, as though holding on to it could steady her. "Why would you say that?" she finally whispered, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it calm. Daniel glanced at her, its expression unreadable but soft. "Because it's true. I see how you've stopped shining, and I can't stand watching it." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said something like that to her, not even Mark. Especially not Mark, for years. She had moved quietly through their marriage, supportive and patient, but always in the background of his world. She told herself it was enough. But now, sitting here, hearing Daniel speak with such conviction, she realized how much she had been missing. The road stretched long and quiet. The houses blurred past, their windows glowing faintly, lives moving inside them, families gathered at dinner tables. Emily wondered if anyone else felt what she felt, this strange pull between duty and desire, between loyalty and longing. Daniel's voice came again, steady but low. "You've forgotten yourself, Emily, but I haven't." Her heart thudded painfully. She gripped the edge of her seat, trying to ground herself. She wanted to deny it, to insist she was fine, that she was content. But the words wouldn't come, because a part of her, buried deep, knew he was right. She stole a glance at him. His profile was calm, almost unshaken, but the muscle in his jaw moved as if he was holding back more than he was saying. She wondered what he wasn't telling her, what words were locked behind his silence. And she wondered, dangerously, she wanted to hear them. The drizzle turned into a light mist, and the road opened wide, stretching toward her neighborhood. Emily leaned back against the seat, her body tensed, her thoughts louder than the rain. Every word Daniel had spoken replayed in her mind. Echoing like thunder in the distance, she told herself she couldn't let this happen. This was wrong. This was dangerous. But at the same time, she couldn't stop the warmth spreading through her chest. The quiet thrill of being seen in a way she hadn't in years. Daniel broke the silence again. "You don't have to answer me, not now. I just needed you to hear it." Emily's pulse raced. She wanted to speak, to say something, anything to close the distance his words had created. But all she managed was a soft, shaky Daniel. Her voice carried both gratitude and confusion, both longing and restraint. She didn't finish the thought. She couldn't. He gave a small nod as if he understood. He didn't push further. He let the quiet return, but the quiet was no longer gentle. It was thick with unspoken truths, with emotions too strong to name. The car rolled slowly into the familiar streets of her neighborhood. The houses stood in neat rows, each one dark and still, except for the occasional porch light glowing faintly. Her home was close now. Too close. Emily felt the seconds slipping away, the ride ending, the moment nearing its inevitable close. And yet she didn't want it to end. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. She pressed them together to steady herself, but the storm inside her refused to calm. She wasn't ready for the driveway, for the silence of her home, for the weight of pretending this night had been ordinary. The closer they came, the more she realized something had shifted. Daniel's words had opened a door inside her. She couldn't shut again. And as the car rolled forward, she braced herself not for the storm outside, but for the one waiting inside her heart. When Daniel turned onto her street, Emily's breath caught. Her house came into view, dark and quiet, just as she had expected. But nothing inside her felt the same. The storm had already changed her. The distance between her and Daniel might have been proper respectful, but it felt too close all the same. And as the car slowed, Emily knew one thing with painful clarity. Whatever this was, whatever had started tonight, it wasn't something she could simply forget. Daniel's car slowed to a stop in front of Emily's house. The storm had softened into a light drizzle, the rain dripping gently from the trees that lined the driveway. The porch light was off, the house dark and silent, like it had been waiting for her return. Emily stared at it from the passenger seat, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. She thought she would feel relief to be home, but instead her chest grew heavy. The ride was ending, and with it, the strange, stirring conversation that had awakened parts of her she thought were gone. Neither of them moved. The car engine hummed quietly, filling the silence. Daniel kept his hands on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale, his jaw tense. Emily could feel the weight of his unspoken thoughts. She glanced at him quickly, then away again, afraid of what she might see if their eyes locked too long. Finally, Daniel exhaled, breaking the quiet. "Emily," he said, his voice rough but steady, "Mark is lucky. Lucky to have you." His words landed heavy, heavier than a compliment should. Emily's throat tightened. She wasn't sure how to respond. She turned slightly toward him, her lips parting, but no words came. She lowered her gaze instead, staring at her hands. "Thank you," she whispered. It was all she could manage, though she wished she had more to give. More to explain. Daniel gripped the wheel tighter, as if steadying himself. His next words came slowly, measured, but full of meaning. I hope he realizes it. I hope he sees what he has before it slips too far away." Emily's heart stung at the truth hidden in his voice. She wanted to defend her husband, to argue that Mark did see her, that he did value her. But she couldn't. Deep down, she knew Daniel was right. The silence between her and Mark had stretched too long, the distance too wide. And hearing someone else notice that someone this close made it impossible to ignore. She swallowed hard, her chest rising and falling quickly. "Daniel," she said softly, but her voice trailed off. She didn't know what she meant to say. His name alone carried all the confusion, the gratitude, the ache. He turned then, finally looking at her fully. His eyes were steady, serious, but filled with something that shook her more than the storm had. "You deserve more than silence, Emily," he said quietly. "You deserve to be seen, to be loved in the way you once dreamed of." The words pierced through her, leaving her breathless. She blinked rapidly, fighting the heat in her eyes. A wave of emotion surged within her, longing, guilt, fear, hope. She wanted to escape it, to open the car door and run inside. But she also wanted to stay, to let the moment stretch, to feel that truth for as long as she could. Her fingers curled around the handle of her purse, gripping it tightly. "You shouldn't say that," she whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel didn't flinch. "Maybe not. But someone has to. You can't keep pretending you're fine when I can see you fading." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time she realized this wasn't just friendship. There was something else in his eyes, something she had ignored for years. Maybe because she had been too afraid to face it. The rain tapped softly against the roof, filling the silence that followed. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears, louder than the storm. She wanted to speak, but her voice refused to come. All she could do was sit in the quiet, trapped between the life she had built and the life she secretly longed for. Finally, she reached for the door handle. Her hand shook as she pulled it open, the cool night air rushing in. She stepped out slowly, her legs unsteady, her heart racing so fast she thought Daniel might hear it. She closed the door behind her, but didn't move toward the porch right away. She stood there, her hand resting on the strap of her purse. staring at the dark outline of her home. Through the window of the car, she could see Daniel still sitting, his head bowed slightly, his hands gripping the wheel. He didn't drive off immediately. It was as though he, too, was caught in the weight of the moment. Unsure how to move forward, Emily finally turned and walked toward the porch. Her heels clicked softly against the wet pavement, each step heavier than the last. She stopped at the door and placed her hand against it, but she didn't unlock it right away. Instead, she turned back. Daniel was still there. Their eyes met one last time through the rain-speckled glass of his window. No words passed between them, but the silence said enough. Something unspoken had happened tonight. Something she couldn't explain but couldn't forget. A sharp ache settled in her chest. She opened the door to her house and stepped inside, the quiet wrapping around her instantly. The air smelled faintly of cedar and rain, but the emptiness felt stronger. She leaned against the door after closing it, pressing her hand to her chest outside. She heard the faint sound of Daniel's car pulling away, the hum fading into the distance. She shut her eyes tightly, the weight of his words echoing in her mind. "You deserve to be seen," she whispered into the quiet, though no one could hear her. "Why does it feel like you see me more than he ever has?" Her own words left her shaken. She pressed her back harder against the door, sliding down slowly until she sat on the floor. The tears she had held back finally came, silent but unstoppable. Not tears of sadness alone, but of realization, of longing, of the dangerous truth she could no longer deny. Something had shifted tonight. The driveway confession had broken the silence of her heart, and Emily knew she would never be the same. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed with the covers pulled up to her chest, her body still and her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent except for the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Mark slept beside her, his breaths deep and even, unaware of the storm raging inside her. Every time Emily closed her eyes, she heard Daniel's voice again. "You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be loved." Those words wouldn't let her go. She turned to her side, facing away from Mark. His back was to her, as it usually was. She remembered a time when they used to fall asleep holding hands, whispering plans for the future. Now there was only distance, the kind that had crept in so slowly she hadn't noticed until it was too late. She pulled the blanket tighter, fighting the tears that wanted to rise again. By morning, her body was heavy with exhaustion. She moved quietly through the house, preparing coffee and setting the table. When Mark finally came down, he looked rushed, distracted, scrolling through his phone as he sipped his drink. He barely looked up, barely spoke, except to say, "I'll be late tonight." "Big meeting." Emily nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, something cracked. It wasn't the fact that he was busy, it was that he didn't notice her at all. He didn't see the redness in her eyes from a sleepless night. He didn't hear the silence that weighed between them. He just moved through the morning as if she were invisible. When the door closed behind him, the house fell quiet again. Emily sat at the table, staring at the untouched toast on her plate. The words from last night echoed louder in the silence. "You deserve to be seen." She whispered it under her breath, testing the truth of it, letting it sink in. The day dragged slowly. She tried to distract herself with chores, with reading, even with music, but nothing worked. Every thought circled back to Daniel, his steady voice, the way he looked at her as if he could see all the hidden parts of her. The way he noticed what Mark hadn't in years. It scared her, but it also made her feel alive by afternoon. She found herself standing by the window, staring at the street outside. She wondered if Daniel was somewhere nearby, if he was thinking about her too. She shook the thought away, pressing her hands to her face. "This is wrong," she told herself. "You can't let this grow. He's Mark's friend. He's not yours, but the heart doesn't follow rules." Later that evening, Mark finally came home. He was drained, his tie loose, his phone buzzing with messages. Emily tried to talk to him, asked how the meeting went, if he wanted dinner, but his answers were short, distracted. He kissed her cheek absent-mindedly, his eyes still on the screen. It was a small gesture, but the emptiness behind it stung more than silence. Emily excused herself early and went upstairs. She stood in front of the mirror, studying her reflection. She saw the lines of worry on her forehead, the tiredness in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped. She hardly recognized the woman staring back at her, and for the first time, she admitted it. She felt more like a shadow in her own life than a person. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Her heart leaped before she even looked. It wasn't Daniel, just a message from a friend asking about plans for the weekend. But the reaction itself frightened her. She hadn't felt anticipation like that in years. That night, she dreamed of rain, of sitting in the car again, of Daniel's eyes holding hers in the quiet storm. When she woke, the ache in her chest was sharper. She knew this wasn't fading. The following days blurred together, but Daniel lingered in her thoughts. His words had lit a fire she couldn't put out. She started noticing things she hadn't before: the way Mark avoided long conversations, the way he filled the silence with work, the way she had accepted it all without question. Now, she couldn't ignore it. One evening, when she was out for groceries, she saw Daniel across the parking lot. He was walking toward his truck, a bag in one hand, his jacket damp from the drizzle. Their eyes met unexpectedly, and for a moment time seemed to pause. He gave her a small, cautious smile, one that carried a weight she felt deep inside. She froze, gripping the handle of her cart tighter. Part of her wanted to walk over, to say something, anything. But another part held her back, reminding her of the line she wasn't supposed to cross. In the end, she only nodded before turning away, her pulse racing. That night, Emily lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long she could keep pretending. The silence between her and Mark felt heavier than ever. But the unspoken connection with Daniel felt dangerously close, like a secret growing stronger in the dark. Her heart was caught between two truths: loyalty to the life she had built and the undeniable pull toward the man who had reminded her what it felt like to be alive. As the days passed, one question grew louder inside her. What happens if I can't ignore this anymore? And though she didn't have the answer yet, Emily knew one thing for certain: the echo of Daniel's words had changed her, and nothing would ever feel the same again. The week after the storm felt longer than the year before it. Emily moved through her house like a ghost, performing her routines but feeling detached from everything around her. She cooked, cleaned, answered calls, smiled when she had to butt inside. She was restless. The echo of Daniel's words had not faded. If anything, they had grown louder. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be loved. Every corner of her home reminded her of the silence. Mark's absence stretched beyond his late nights. It lived in the spaces between their conversations, in the way he sat across from her at dinner with his thoughts elsewhere, in the way he kissed her without looking into her eyes. It wasn't cruelty. It was neglect, the slow forgetting of someone who once mattered most. One Thursday evening, Mark came home later than usual. Emily was waiting, not because she needed to, but because she couldn't bear another night of unsaid words. He set down his briefcase, loosened his tie, and reached for a glass of water. She watched him carefully, her heart pounding. "Mark," she said, her voice steady but soft. He glanced up briefly. "Yeah. Do you think we're happy?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Mark blinked, caught off guard, then frowned slightly. "Course we are. Why would you ask that?" Emily swallowed hard. "'Cause it doesn't feel like it." For the first time in months, he looked at her fully. His brow furrowed, his mouth opening, but no words came. The silence stretched until Emily filled it herself. "We used to talk. We used to dream together. Now it feels like we just exist in the same house. I don't feel seen anymore, Mark." His shoulders tensed. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her eyes. "Work's been heavy. You know that. Things change when you've been married a while." "It doesn't mean I don't care, but caring isn't the same as loving," she whispered. Her words stung even her own ears. She hadn't planned to say them, but once they were spoken, she couldn't take them back. Mark froze, his face unreadable. Then he sighed deeply, picking up his phone again, as if retreating. "You're tired," he muttered. "We'll talk later," but later never came. That night, Emily lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. She realized that waiting for him to change was like waiting for rain in the desert. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unfaithful. He was simply gone in every way that mattered. And she could no longer pretend she didn't feel the emptiness. The next day, she drove to the edge of town where the hills stretched wide and the air smelled of pine. She needed space, clarity. As she parked near the overlook, she found herself dialing a number she hadn't meant to. Her hands shook when the call connected. "Emily?" Daniel's voice came warm and careful. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then the words tumbled out. "I don't know why I called. I needed to hear someone who remembers who I used to be." There was silence on the line, but it wasn't empty. Then Daniel spoke softly. "I remember, Emily. I always have." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, her chest trembling. "I can't keep living like this," she whispered. "Then don't," he replied gently. "You have a choice." The simplicity of it struck her. Choice. She had been waiting for life to change on its own, but Daniel was right. Change would never come unless she chose it. She sat there, the phone pressed to her ear, the weight of years pressing against the possibility of something new. When she finally drove home, the sky was clear, the storm long gone. But inside her, the storm had done its work, had forced her to see the truth. That evening, she sat across from Mark again at the dinner table. He talked briefly about a project at work, his eyes fixed on his plate. Emily listened quietly, her decision forming with every passing second. When the silence came, she placed her fork down and folded her hands. "Mark," she said calmly, "we can't keep pretending." He looked up, puzzled. "Pretending what?" "That this is enough. That we're happy. That I'm not disappearing in front of you." His expression hardened. "What are you saying, Emily?" Her voice trembled but stayed firm. "I'm saying I need more than this silence. I need more than being a shadow in my own home. And if you can't give me that, then I don't know if we can keep going." The room grew still. For once, Mark didn't reach for his phone, didn't rush to brush it aside. He stared at her, his mouth set, his eyes conflicted. But no words came. Emily rose slowly from her chair, her hands shaking, but her heart steady. She didn't have all the answers yet. She didn't know what tomorrow would hold, or what paths would open. But she knew she could no longer live unseen. That night, when she stood by the window looking out at the street, she felt a strange mix of fear and freedom. She didn't call Daniel again, not yet. This wasn't about running into someone else's arms. It was about finally stepping into her own life. As the rain from earlier that week had cleared the air, the storm inside her had cleared her vision. She understood now that love wasn't about duty or habitat, was about being seen, valued, chosen every day. And if Mark couldn't choose her, then she would choose herself. The night was quiet. But inside Emily's heart, a new beginning stirred. She didn't know where it would take her. She only knew that she would no longer be invisible. For the first time in years, she felt alive.